Some people spend their entire lives searching for someone who truly sees them. I never expected that person would walk into my cafe on a rainy Tuesday morning. At 27, I had mastered the art of smiling when I did not feel like it. Customers loved that about me. My manager expected it. The world rewarded it. What nobody seemed to notice was how exhausting it could be. Every morning, I arrived at Maple Street Cafe before sunrise. The city of Chicago looked different at 5:30 in the morning. The streets were quieter. The air felt colder. The world had not yet remembered how busy it wanted to be. I unlocked the front door, switched on the lights, and prepared for another day of serving coffee, pastries, and pieces of my patience. The cafe itself was small but charming. Exposed brick walls, wooden tables, soft music playing through old speakers. Most customers came for the atmosphere as much as the coffee. I liked that. It felt less like a business and more like a temporary shelter for people carrying invisible burdens. Unfortunately, my manager did not share that perspective. Grace, those tables should have been cleaned 10 minutes ago. Grace, do not waste time talking to customers. Grace, smile more. He always wanted more. More speed. More energy. More perfection. Never more kindness. By noon, I had already worked 6 straight hours without a break. A businessman complained that his cappuccino foam looked different than yesterday. A teenager spilled an entire iced coffee across the counter. Someone left a negative online review because it had taken 4 minutes to receive a muffin. Through all of it, I smiled. Not because I felt happy, because it was easier than explaining why I was tired. Around 2 o'clock, the rain began. Soft at first, then steady. Customers hurried inside seeking warmth and shelter. I moved between tables carrying cups and plates while watching water slide down the windows. That was when the bell above the door rang again. I looked up automatically. The man who entered seemed completely out of place. He wore a dark tailored coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His posture was confident without being arrogant. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the weather. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. Green. Quiet. Tired. Not physically tired. The kind of tired that sleep could not fix. He scanned the room once before choosing a corner booth near the window. "What can I get started for you?" I asked a few moments later. His gaze lifted toward me. For some reason, the entire cafe suddenly felt quieter. "Espresso," he said. His voice was calm, deep, controlled. "Anything else?" For a brief second, I thought I saw amusement in his eyes. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether the espresso is any good." I laughed. A real laugh. Not the customer service version. That sounds like a challenge. Perhaps it is. 5 minutes later, I delivered the espresso to his table. He took a sip, considered it carefully, then nodded once. "Acceptable." I pretended to look offended. "Acceptable. I am trying not to seem too impressed." Another laugh escaped me. This time he smiled slightly, just enough to change his entire face. For the next hour, he sat alone near the window while rain tapped softly against the glass. He did not make phone calls. He did not work on a laptop. He simply watched the city. Occasionally I caught him watching me, not in a way that felt uncomfortable, more like he was trying to remember something. Eventually the rain slowed. Most customers left. The man finished his espresso and stood. I expected him to leave immediately. Instead, he paused beside the counter. "Thank you, Grace." I blinked. I had never told him my name. Before I could ask how he knew it, he placed a generous tip beside the register and walked out into the fading rain. I watched him disappear down the sidewalk. Then I looked at the untouched newspaper he had left behind. Folded neatly across the front page was a photograph of the same man standing beside people powerful enough to make headlines. And suddenly, I realized the stranger in the corner booth was not nearly as ordinary as he wanted me to believe. I could have ignored the newspaper. That would have been the sensible thing to do. People left newspapers behind every day. Customers forgot umbrellas, books, sunglasses, and occasionally their common sense. But something about that photograph refused to leave my mind. After my shift ended, I carried the newspaper home and spread it across my tiny kitchen table. The photograph was not large, but it was clear enough. The man from the corner booth stood beside city officials and business leaders whose names I recognized immediately. The article itself mentioned investments, redevelopment projects, and charitable foundations. One name appeared several times. Victor Romano. I read it twice. Then a third time. Somehow the name suited him. Strong. Controlled. Impossible to forget. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe before sunrise as usual. I told myself I was not looking for him. That lasted approximately 15 minutes. Every time the bell above the door rang, my eyes lifted automatically. Every time it was someone else, I felt a ridiculous amount of disappointment. By 11 o'clock, I had almost convinced myself he was never coming back. Then the door opened. The familiar dark coat appeared first. Then the sharp green eyes. Then the calm expression that somehow made the noisy cafe feel quieter. Victor walked directly to the same corner booth near the window. My heart performed a reaction I chose not to examine too closely. Back already? I asked when I approached his table. A faint smile appeared. The espresso was acceptable. You are lucky I am feeling generous today. I suspected as much. This time he ordered the same thing. Espresso. Nothing else. I brought it over a few minutes later and noticed something unusual. Outside the cafe, parked across the street, sat a black SUV. Another was parked farther down the block. Both vehicles looked expensive enough to purchase my entire apartment building. Friends of yours? I asked casually. Victor glanced toward the window. Something like that. It was not an answer. I was beginning to notice he specialized in those. Throughout the afternoon, customers came and went. Victor remained, occasionally reading, occasionally staring out at the street, occasionally watching me move between tables. What surprised me most was how peaceful he seemed inside the cafe. The hard edges, visible in his newspaper photographs, softened whenever he sat near that window. Around 3 o'clock, my manager decided the day required additional misery. Grace, table 7 has been waiting too long. They ordered 90 seconds ago. Do not argue. I bit back the response I wanted to give and walked away. A few minutes later, he criticized how I arranged pastry trays, then how I cleaned a counter, then how I greeted customers. By the fourth complaint, I could feel my smile becoming difficult to maintain. When I passed Victor's table again, he looked up from his coffee. Long day? He asked quietly. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was easier than telling the truth. You could say that. His eyes followed my manager across the room. For the briefest moment, something changed in his expression. Not anger. Not exactly. Just attention. The kind of attention powerful people give problems they intend to solve. Then it vanished. The rest of the afternoon passed normally. Or as normally as possible. Just before closing, Victor stood and placed cash beneath his cup. Far too much cash. You forgot your change, I called after him. He stopped beside the door. Keep it. That is not how change works. A genuine smile appeared. Then consider it appreciation. Before I could argue, he left. Through the window, I watched him step outside. Instantly, the driver of one SUV opened a door. Another man in a suit approached him with what looked like documents. Several people on the sidewalk moved aside without being asked. And that was the moment I realized something important. Victor Romano was not simply wealthy. He was the kind of man whose presence changed the behavior of everyone around him. The only question was why a man like that kept returning to a small neighborhood cafe. I learned two things about Victor Romano during the following week. The first was that he always arrived at exactly the same time. 2:15 in the afternoon. Not 2:14. Not 2:16. 2:15. The second was that no matter how crowded the cafe became, he somehow noticed every detail. He noticed when a regular customer changed her order. He noticed when a delivery arrived late. He noticed when I was tired before I admitted it to myself. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Then one Thursday afternoon proved I was not. The lunch rush had been particularly brutal. Every table was occupied. The espresso machine had decided to behave like a rebellious teenager. And my manager seemed determined to spend the entire day criticizing me. By the time Victor arrived, I was operating entirely on caffeine and stubbornness. He settled into his usual corner booth while rain drifted softly outside the windows. I brought over his espresso without asking. "You remembered," he said. "You have ordered the same thing every day for 2 weeks. Consistency is an underrated quality." That sounds like something a businessman would say. A small smile appeared. Perhaps. Before I could continue, my manager called my name from across the room. Loudly. Far louder than necessary. Every customer within 20 feet looked up. "Grace, I need you in the back. Now." Embarrassment burned across my face. I excused myself and followed him into the storage room. The moment the door closed, the lecture began. A customer had complained that a sandwich arrived 3 minutes late. Somehow this had become my fault. Then another issue appeared. Then another. By the time he finished, I felt smaller than I had all day. Maybe if you spent less time chatting with customers and more time working, we would not have these problems. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself. Instead, I nodded and returned to the dining area. That was easier. It was always easier. But something felt different. The smile I normally wore so effortlessly refused to appear. I moved through the rest of my shift quietly, efficiently, mechanically. For the first time in years, I simply did not have the energy to pretend everything was fine. Nearly an hour passed before I approached Victor's table again. His espresso cup sat empty. He had barely touched the pastry I brought earlier. "You should probably eat something," I said. He looked up. "You should probably take your own advice." I laughed weakly. Fair point. His eyes studied me for a moment. Not the way most people looked at someone. Not casually. Carefully. As if he was reading a page everyone else ignored. "You are not smiling today." The observation landed harder than it should have. I glanced away. Forgot. Silence settled between us. Outside, cars rolled through puddles beneath gray skies. Inside, the cafe hummed with conversation and coffee grinders. Victor leaned back slightly. "For what it is worth, I think this place depends on that smile more than it realizes." My throat tightened unexpectedly. It was such a simple thing to say. Yet somehow nobody had ever said it before. Nobody had ever noticed when the smile disappeared. A few minutes later he stood to leave. As always, he placed cash beneath the cup. As always, it was too much. But this time he paused beside the counter before walking out. His gaze drifted briefly toward my manager, then back to me. The expression in his eyes had changed. It was calm, controlled. Yet beneath that calm sat something I had never seen before. Determination. The kind that made powerful men impossible to ignore. Then he gave me a small nod and stepped into the rain. I watched him disappear through the glass doors, unaware that it would be the last ordinary day Maple Street Café would ever have. The next morning began exactly like every other morning. That was what made it so strange. The coffee machines hummed. The smell of fresh pastries filled the air. Customers drifted in carrying umbrellas and unfinished conversations. Everything looked normal. Yet by noon I realized something was changing. I just did not know what. It started with questions. 2 men in business suits entered the cafe shortly after 11. They ordered coffee, sat near the window, and spent nearly an hour observing the room. Not talking. Observing. The moment they left, another woman arrived carrying a tablet and a folder filled with documents. She walked through the cafe slowly, examining the walls, the tables, even the ceiling. At first I assumed they were inspectors. Then I noticed something unusual. Every person who entered carried the same expression. Focused, professional, purposeful, as though they were evaluating something important. Around 1 o'clock, my manager became increasingly nervous. He disappeared into his office 3 separate times to answer phone calls. Each time he returned looking more irritated than before. By mid-afternoon, even the other employees had noticed. "What is going on?" my coworker Megan whispered while arranging pastries. "No idea." "Your guess is as good as mine." The truth was I did have a guess. A ridiculous one. But I refused to say it out loud. Victor had not appeared that day. For the first time in weeks, his corner booth remained empty. Somehow that bothered me more than it should have. At 3 o'clock, my manager called an emergency staff meeting. We gathered near the back storage room. Nobody looked happy. Least of all him. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. There may be some ownership changes coming. The room immediately fell silent. What kind of ownership changes? Megan asked. The building is being evaluated. His answer sounded rehearsed. That is all I can say right now. Nobody believed that. The rest of the afternoon felt tense. Customers continued arriving, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone sensed uncertainty hanging in the air. By closing time, I felt exhausted. Once the last customer left, I finished cleaning tables and prepared to head home. That was when I noticed a black luxury sedan parked across the street. The vehicle looked familiar. My heart immediately recognized it before my mind did. One of Victor's cars. A few moments later, the rear door opened. Victor stepped onto the sidewalk. The city lights reflected across wet pavement as he adjusted his coat and looked toward the cafe. Relief washed over me unexpectedly. Then confusion followed immediately behind it. Why was I relieved? Before I could answer my own question, he crossed the street and entered through the front door. The bell above the entrance rang softly. The cafe was empty except for employees finishing closing duties. Every person inside looked toward him. Some recognized him instantly. Others simply sensed he was important. Victor approached the counter. Long day? He asked. I laughed quietly. You always seem to know. I pay attention. There was something different about him tonight. He seemed thoughtful, almost distracted. You missed your espresso. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I know. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then his gaze drifted across the room. The tables, the walls, the windows, every detail, almost as though he was memorizing the place. Do you like working here? He asked suddenly. The question surprised me. I glanced around the cafe. Sometimes. Only sometimes? I smiled faintly. The people are wonderful. The job is not always. Victor nodded slowly, as if confirming something, as if a decision he had already made had just become easier. Then he looked back at me. His expression softened in a way I had never seen before. Nobody should have to lose a place that matters to them. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then slipped it back into his pocket. I should go. He turned toward the door. Halfway there he paused. Grace. Yeah. A small smile appeared. The kind that never quite reached his eyes, yet somehow felt genuine anyway. Tomorrow might be different. Then he stepped into the Chicago night, leaving me standing beneath the cafe lights with a feeling I could not explain. And for the first time, I wondered if the changes coming to Maple Street Cafe had anything at all to do with Victor Romano. The next day was different. Victor had been right about that. I just had no idea how different it would be. I arrived at Maple Street Cafe before sunrise, expecting the usual routine. Unlock the door. Start the machines. Prepare for another long day. Instead, I found my manager standing near the entrance looking as though he had not slept all night. His shirt was wrinkled. His expression was tense. And for the first time since I started working there, he did not have a single criticism waiting for me. Morning, I said carefully. Morning. That was it. No complaints. No instructions. No reminders about smiling more. I should have enjoyed the silence. Somehow it only made me nervous. Throughout the morning, the atmosphere inside the cafe felt strange. Employees whispered in corners. Phone calls arrived. Constantly. Several people in business attire entered and left throughout the day carrying folders and tablets. Around noon, my coworker Megan approached me near the pastry display. Something big is happening. You think? She rolled her eyes. I am serious. So am I. Neither of us knew what was going on, but everyone could feel it. Even the customers noticed. By late afternoon, a steady rain had settled over Chicago again. Water streaked across the windows while traffic crawled through the streets outside. The weather matched my mood perfectly. Confused, restless, uncertain. Then the call came. My manager gathered the entire staff near closing time. His hands shook slightly as he held a sheet of paper. I have an announcement. Nobody spoke. The room fell completely silent. As of this afternoon, Maple Street Cafe has officially been sold. A collective gasp moved through the room. My stomach dropped. Every employee immediately exchanged worried looks. Sold. The word echoed through my mind. Sold meant change. Change usually meant layoffs. New ownership. New rules. New problems. What happens to us? Someone asked. I do not know yet. The answer did nothing to reassure anyone. The meeting ended minutes later. Employees gathered their belongings and headed home carrying fear they tried unsuccessfully to hide. I stayed behind to finish cleaning. The empty cafe felt unusually quiet. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Inside, uncertainty sat beside me like an unwanted guest. Nearly an hour passed before I finally locked the front door and stepped into the evening. The bus stop stood 2 blocks away. By the time I reached it, the rain had soaked through my jacket. I sat alone beneath the shelter and stared at the envelope containing my paycheck. It looked smaller than it should have. Again, rent was due in 5 days. My car needed repairs. My savings account was almost non-existent. For the first time in months, exhaustion won. Not physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. The kind that settles deep inside your chest and convinces you nothing will ever improve. Headlights appeared through the rain. A black luxury sedan pulled quietly to the curb. Recognized it immediately. The rear passenger door opened. Victor stepped out holding a large black umbrella. Somehow he looked exactly the same as always. Calm. Collected. Completely unaffected by the storm. You look like someone carrying the weight of the city, he said. I laughed softly. The city would probably be lighter. He stood beside the bus shelter for a moment. Not speaking. Not offering advice. Just standing there. Somehow that felt more comforting than anything anyone could have said. Finally he glanced toward the paycheck envelope in my hands. Then back at me. Bad day. I looked down at the rain-dark pavement. I think I might be losing the one place that feels like home. The words escaped before I could stop them. Victor became very still. A passing car splashed through a puddle nearby. The city continued moving around us. Yet for a moment everything seemed to pause. Grace, he said quietly, what if you are not losing it? I looked up. Rain glistened along the edge of the umbrella. His green eyes held an expression I could not quite understand. Confidence. Certainty. As if he already knew something I did not. Before I could ask what he meant, a small smile touched his face. Get some rest tonight. Why? His gaze remained steady. Because tomorrow is going to surprise you. Then he opened the car door, stepped back inside, and disappeared into the rain, leaving me with a question that would change everything when the sun came up. The next morning, I arrived 20 minutes early. Sleep had been almost impossible. Victor's words repeated through my mind all night. Tomorrow is going to surprise you. I told myself not to expect anything. Experience had taught me that expectations usually led to disappointment. Still, as I walked toward Maple Street Café beneath a pale gray Chicago sky, I could not shake the feeling that something important was waiting for me. The first sign appeared before I even reached the front door. The old sign hanging above the entrance was gone. In its place stood workers installing a freshly polished replacement. The windows had been cleaned. New flower boxes sat beneath the glass. The entire building somehow looked brighter, more alive. I stopped on the sidewalk and stared. What happened? The question escaped before I realized I had spoken aloud. When I stepped inside, the surprises continued. Employees stood in small groups talking excitedly. The atmosphere felt completely different from the anxiety-filled silence of the previous day. Megan spotted me first. Grace. She practically ran across the room. Have you heard? Heard what? Her eyes widened. You seriously do not know? My confusion only deepened. Know what? Before she could answer, someone tapped a spoon against a coffee cup. The sound echoed gently through the cafe. Every conversation stopped. I turned toward the front counter. A man in a navy suit stood beside the espresso machine holding a folder. Several unfamiliar faces stood behind him. Lawyers, maybe. Business executives. The kind of people who looked expensive. Thank you all for coming in early, he began. I would like to officially introduce the new ownership group. A ripple of nervous energy moved through the room. Here it comes, I thought. New rules. New management. New problems. Instead, the man smiled. Effective immediately. All current employees will retain their positions. Several people exchanged shocked looks. Employee wages are being increased. More surprise. Benefits will be expanded. A few mouths literally fell open. And all scheduling policies will be revised to ensure fair treatment of staff. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed capable of speaking. The man continued explaining improvements, renovations, and future plans. Yet I barely heard any of it. My attention had drifted toward the back of the room, toward the familiar figure standing near the windows. Victor Romano. He wore a dark charcoal suit. One hand rested casually in his pocket. The other held a coffee cup. While everyone else listened to the presentation, Victor watched me. Not proudly, not dramatically, quietly, almost cautiously, as if he was waiting to see my reaction. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. Employees immediately erupted into conversation. Excitement filled every corner of the cafe. I walked straight toward Victor. My heart beat faster with every step. You knew. He nodded once. Yes. You knew all of this was happening. Yes. I folded my arms. And you did not tell me. The faintest hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. You seemed determined to be surprised. I should have been angry. Instead, I found myself laughing. Who are you? The question came out softer than I intended. Victor looked around the cafe. Employees smiling. Customers beginning to arrive. Morning sunlight filtering through clean windows. Then he looked back at me. Someone who thought this place deserved better. My gaze narrowed. That is not a real answer. No. Then give me the real one. For a moment he seemed to consider it. Then he set down his coffee cup. Grace, he said quietly, I bought this cafe yesterday. The entire world seemed to stop. Every sound disappeared. Every conversation faded. I simply stared at him. Surely I had heard him wrong. Yet the calm certainty in his expression left no room for misunderstanding. Victor Romano had not influenced the sale. He had not advised the new owners. He had not invested in the business. He had bought the entire cafe. And somehow, I knew the most unbelievable part of the story had not even begun yet. For several seconds I forgot how to speak. The noise of the cafe faded into the background. The customers, the employees, the espresso machine. Everything disappeared behind a single impossible fact. Victor Romano had bought Maple Street Cafe. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. You bought it. I finally managed. Yes. The entire cafe? Yes. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Victor's expression remained calm. Almost too calm. Because I wanted to. People do not buy businesses because they want to. A faint smile appeared. You would be surprised. I folded my arms. That is not a real answer either. His eyes softened slightly. I know. Before I could push further, one of the new managers approached with paperwork requiring his attention. The conversation ended before it truly began. Victor excused himself and disappeared into an office near the back of the building. I spent the rest of the morning pretending to work while my mind replayed the same question over and over. Why? Every explanation sounded ridiculous. By lunchtime, the cafe felt transformed. Employees smiled more. Customers noticed the improvements. Even the atmosphere seemed lighter. For the first time since I started working there, nobody looked afraid of making a mistake. Around 2 o'clock, Megan cornered me near the pastry display. You know him. I nearly dropped a tray. What? The owner. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. You know him. I know a customer. Grace. Fine. I know a customer who apparently buys entire cafes. Megan stared at me. That is somehow more confusing. I could not argue with that. Later that afternoon, Victor finally emerged from the office. Several executives immediately approached him with questions. He answered calmly. Decisions were made quickly. Problems disappeared almost instantly. Watching him work felt like watching someone conduct an orchestra. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. Yet somehow everything moved exactly the way he wanted. It was the first time I truly understood how much influence he carried. Not because people feared him, because people trusted him to lead. When the afternoon rush ended, I found him standing alone near the window where he always sat. The same corner booth remained untouched, almost reserved, waiting. I walked over carrying a fresh espresso. "You still owe me an explanation." Victor accepted the cup with a small smile. Persistent. Curious. Dangerous combination. "You bought my café." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "Our café." The correction caught me off guard. For some reason it mattered. "Fine. Our café." He took a sip before speaking again. "Do you remember what you said at the bus stop?" I thought back to the previous evening. Then, exhaustion. Fear. Then I remembered. I think I might be losing the one place that feels like home. My chest tightened. Victor watched me carefully. "You meant it." Of course I meant it. Most people would have talked about the paycheck. His gaze drifted around the room. "You talked about the place." I followed his eyes. The wooden tables. The old brick walls. The customers reading books near the windows. Maple Street Cafe had been part of my life for years. "This place matters to people," I said quietly. Victor nodded once. "Exactly." A long silence settled between us. Then he surprised me again. "Do you know what I saw the first day I walked in here?" I shook my head. His expression became thoughtful, almost distant. "I saw a woman having one of the hardest days of her life." My breath caught. "And?" His eyes met mine. The room suddenly felt very quiet. She still found a reason to smile at a complete stranger. For the first time since this conversation began, I had no response. None at all. Victor looked away briefly before continuing. "That is rarer than you think, Grace." Something shifted inside me. Not because of what he said, because of how sincerely he believed it. Then the front door opened and several customers entered. The moment passed. But as Victor returned to his coffee and I returned to work, one realization followed me through the rest of the afternoon. I was finally getting closer to the truth. And somehow, I suspected the real reason he bought Maple Street Cafe had very little to do with business. The answer finally arrived 3 days later. Not because Victor intended to tell me, because I refused to stop asking. The cafe had never been busier. Word about the renovations, better service, and improved atmosphere had spread quickly through the neighborhood. Customers filled nearly every table. Employees looked happier. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow. Yet one question continued following me everywhere. Why? Why would a man like Victor Romano spend millions of dollars on a small neighborhood cafe? Every explanation felt incomplete. That afternoon, after the lunch rush finally ended, I found him sitting alone in his usual corner booth. The same place where everything had started. A cup of espresso rested in front of him. The city moved beyond the rain-speckled windows. For a moment he looked almost peaceful. I carried over a fresh pastry and placed it beside his coffee. "Bribery," I announced. One eyebrow lifted. "For me." "For information." A faint smile appeared. "Dangerous strategy." I slid into the chair across from him before he could object. "Victor." "Grace. Why did you buy this place?" He looked out the window. "We have discussed this." "No. You have avoided this." The smile widened slightly. "Fair." Silence settled between us. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then something changed. The usual careful distance in his expression softened. The walls he kept around himself seemed lower somehow. Not gone. Just lower. "Do you know what most people want from me?" he asked quietly. The question surprised me. "No." "Money." His answer came immediately. "Influence. Access. Favors. Opportunities." He turned the espresso cup slowly between his hands. Sometimes all four at once. I listened without interrupting. People are usually interested in what I can do for them. His eyes lifted toward mine. "You never were." My chest tightened unexpectedly. Victor looked away again. The first day I came here, I had spent 12 hours solving problems. Meetings. Negotiations. Endless conversations with people who wanted something. His voice remained calm, but exhaustion lingered beneath the words. Then I walked into this cafe. I remembered that rainy afternoon. The espresso. The challenge. The smile. "You were having a bad day," I said softly. A small laugh escaped him. That is one way to describe it. The city reflected across the windows behind him. For the first time since meeting Victor, he seemed less like an untouchable figure and more like a man carrying invisible weight. And then you smiled at me. I blinked. That is it. That is it. He nodded once. You smiled because you were kind. Not because you wanted anything. Not because you recognized my name. Not because you expected something in return. My throat tightened. Victor's gaze remained steady. Do you know how rare that is? I did not answer. He did not seem to expect one. I came back the next day because I wanted another cup of espresso. A small smile touched his face. I came back the third day because I wanted to see if the smile was real. Heat rushed to my cheeks. Victor continued before I could respond. Then one day it disappeared. The words landed softly, yet they carried surprising weight. I immediately remembered the afternoon my manager humiliated me in front of customers. The day Victor noticed. I saw how hard you worked, he said quietly. I saw how people treated you. His jaw tightened slightly. And I realized the one person making that place better was the person receiving the least appreciation. Silence settled between us again. This time it felt different. Warmer. More honest. Then Victor looked directly into my eyes. No hesitación. No jokes. No half answers. Grace, I did not buy the cafe because it was profitable. My heart skipped once. Then why? A slow smile appeared. Genuine. Unguarded. The kind I had never seen before. Because I wanted to see you smile again. For a moment, I forgot every word I had ever known. And sitting there across from him, I realized no business decision in the world had ever been about business at all. For the rest of that afternoon, I moved through the cafe in a daze. Customers ordered coffee. Employees restocked shelves. Music drifted softly through the speakers. Everything continued exactly as it always had. Yet nothing felt the same anymore. Because every time I looked toward the corner booth, I remembered what Victor had said. I bought the cafe because I wanted to see you smile again. Any other person could have said those words and sounded dramatic. Coming from Victor, they sounded honest. That was what made them impossible to forget. The following weeks brought changes to Maple Street Cafe. Good changes. The kind people rarely expect but always deserve. Employees received proper schedules. Overtime was respected. Equipment was upgraded. The old tension that once lived inside those walls slowly disappeared. Customers noticed it too. The cafe felt warmer, lighter, more alive. And through all of it, Victor never acted like a man who owned the place. He still sat at the same corner booth. Still ordered the same espresso. Still listened more than he spoke. One evening after closing, I found him standing alone near the front window watching the city lights appear across the street. The cafe was empty except for us. Outside, autumn leaves drifted along the sidewalk beneath glowing street lamps. Can I ask you something? I said. Victor turned toward me. You usually do. I laughed. Fair enough. For a moment I studied him. The expensive suit. The calm expression. The man powerful enough to buy an entire business without hesitation. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my heart for weeks. When was the last time someone did something kind for you? The smile disappeared from his face. Not dramatically. Quietly. As though the question had reached somewhere few people ever bothered to look. Several seconds passed before he answered. I do not remember. The honesty of that response hurt more than I expected. I thought about all the people who wanted things from him. The meetings. The responsibilities. The endless demands. For the first time I understood something important. Victor had not been searching for romance when he walked into Maple Street Cafe. He had been searching for peace. Maybe without even realizing it. I stepped beside him and looked out at the street. That is sad. A soft laugh escaped him. You are very direct. One of my flaws. One of your strengths. Silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward. Not uncertain. Comfortable. The kind of silence that only exists between people who no longer need to impress each other. Finally Victor spoke. Do you know something, Grace? What? He looked around the cafe. The polished tables. The warm lighting. The employees' photos hanging on the wall. The place that had changed both of our lives in ways neither of us expected. I thought I was saving this place. My heart tightened slightly, and a genuine smile appeared. The same rare smile that transformed his entire face. I think this place was saving me. For a moment neither of us spoke. The city moved beyond the glass. Cars passed. People hurried home. Life continued. Yet standing there beside Victor, everything felt strangely still. Peaceful. Complete. I thought back to the rainy afternoon when a tired man walked into a small neighborhood cafe and ordered an espresso. Neither of us had known what would follow. Not the friendship. Not the trust. Not the changes. Not the healing. Then I smiled. Not because I was working. Not because someone expected it. Not because it was my job. I smiled because I wanted to. Victor noticed immediately. Of course he did. His eyes softened with quiet satisfaction. And in that moment I finally understood the truth. He had bought the cafe because he wanted to see me smile again. But somewhere along the way my smile stopped being the reason. It became the reminder. A reminder that kindness matters. That people matter. That sometimes the smallest act of warmth can reach the coldest corners of someone's life. And as the lights of Maple Street Cafe glowed against the Chicago night, I realized neither of us had found what we expected. We found something better. We found a place where two strangers could remind each other how to feel at home again.